If, when you picture the Knights of the Round Table, you picture them in armor so shiny that it reminds you of the Chicago Bean, then it's likely you saw this movie when you were a kid. Let's talk about Excalibur. Excalibur is a 1981 movie directed by John Boorman that made just under $35 million on an $11 million budget. And it's an adaptation of the Arthurian legend that is unlike any other I've seen. It stars Nigel Terry as King Arthur and Thomas Nicole Williamson as Merlin. I remember waiting in line outside the old Granada Theater here in Reno, which is the same theater I would see Return of the Jedi in just over 2 years' time. I saw it with my dad and stepmom, and I can only imagine their chagrin at the very intense sex scene about 15 minutes in, featuring a very naked Igraine with Uther Pendragon grunting and grinding on top of her. The dude didn't even take his armor off. I'm not sure how that would actually work. I've never worn a suit of armor myself, but impractical and uncomfortable is what pops into my brain. And something I just learned when I was researching the background on this movie is that Igraine is played by the director's daughter. How would you direct your daughter in that scene? I mean, right? I know some directors are okay with directing, their wives in spicy scenes. Mike Flanagan, Haunting of Hill House comes to mind. Directing your daughter in that's just weird, right? Just me? Naked people and sex scenes aside, honestly, the thing that stuck with me in the 44 years since I first saw this movie is how gorgeous Camelot is. I read about knights in shining armor, but this movie was the first time I saw knights in shining armor. And that dining hall, the round table, looks like it has a metal finish on the top. Gorgeous. Looks amazing. I am sure that I must have asked my parents if we could have a big round metal top table in our dining room. Just everything about Camelot, the way it was lit, everything just looked amazing. And then Excalibur itself, right? This magic glowing green sword that could cut through indestructible armor. I was hooked right away. And Merlin, Merlin was unlike any wizard I had ever seen before. Up to this point, my wizard role model, I guess, had been Gandalf from both the Hobbit novel and the 1977 animated musical. And he was a completely different wizard being from Merlin, right? Gandalf was mostly dour, sometimes condescending, but I would never describe him as being funny or sarcastic or witty. And Merlin definitely was.
Merlin, can you make her love me?
Now look, I once stood exposed to the dragon's breath so that a man could lie one night with a woman. It took me 9 moons to recover. And all for this lunacy called love, this mad distemper that strikes down both beggar and king. Never again. Never.
Where is it?
It is everywhere. It is everything. Its scales glisten in the bark of trees. Its roar is heard in the wind, and its forked tongue strikes like...
Oh, like lightning. Yes, that's it.
And, cosmetically, Gandalf had a pointy wizard hat, which is fine, but Merlin had a chrome skull cap that looked like it was probably sword and bulletproof. So, I mean, there's no comparison here. Literal chrome dome wins in the Battle of Wizards, as far as I was concerned, and still am. And speaking of bulletproof, I once read a novel called The Once and Future King, and it's explained that the reason Merlin knows everything is not because he's psychic or has foresight, it's because he's living in reverse. So the future, our future, is literally his past. So that's how he knows about things like bullets and gunpowder. And I love that. I love that take on the character. I had never, ever thought of that or seen that written anywhere else until I read that book. So I reread part of it for this, and in parts it's a little dry now, but maybe pick it up, you might like it. So anyway, here's a recap, very brief, of what the movie's about in general terms, and again, some spoilers in this entire movie for a movie that's 44 years old. Arthur is a lowly squire who accidentally pulls the sword from the stone, right? And he becomes king. He then assembles his knights of the Round Table, brings peace and prosperity to the land under his rule as king, and everything's great until he's betrayed by his best knight, Lancelot, and his wife and queen, Guinevere. He then is seduced by his half-sister Morgana, who uses magic to look like Guinevere, and that little illicit union results in the birth of Mordred, who has one of the most annoying laughs in all of cinema. After Mordred is born, Arthur is struck by lightning, and though he survives, he has no mojo. So he thinks that, maybe the Holy Grail can help bring his mojo back, sends his knights out into the world all over the place to search for it. They all die, except for Sir Percival, who brings the holiest of pimp cups back to Camelot, where Arthur sips from it and is healed. So with his mojo meter filled, he sets off to do battle with Mordred, and is victorious, but mortally wounded in the effort. At Arthur's command, Percival returns Excalibur to the moistened bank in the lake, while Arthur is kidnapped by unidentified nuns and put on a boat to God knows where. Anyway, with that out of the way, here's some stuff I thought about while rewatching the movie. As I mentioned at the beginning, this movie still looks gorgeous. It was shot entirely on location in Ireland, and the Blu-ray edition of this movie is absolutely stunning. I'm glad I didn't misremember the green glow that Excalibur gives off. I loved it here, and I also enjoyed a green glowing sword in Hawk the Slayer. I don't know if anyone remembers that except me, but I am a sucker for green glowy stuff. Apologies to Superman, I guess. Something else I loved is I appreciate how all the combat looks exhausting. I imagine that plate armor made from steel would be very heavy, and though the suits in the movie were made from highly polished aluminum, the actors do a great job of evoking, the real weight of a suit of armor. Some, I guess, plot quibbles that I have, and there's not too many of them. How does Sir Percival not recognize Morgana? They were at Camelot at the same time, and she was a fixture at the dinners around the Round Table. Also, she's King Arthur's half-sister and Merlin's apprentice. So when Percival is in the cave with her and Mordred, how does he not recognize her? I just don't get it. The entire Grail quest section, it feels like a fever dream. Percival at one point nearly drowns, and then magically finds the Grail, and then is instantly somehow transported to Arthur's side, still dripping wet, with the Grail full of blood or wine or something. I know it's all magic, I'm sure, but still, it was very much, it felt like a fever dream to me. It reminded me of the feeling I had while watching Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, the part with the sirens. I woke up and I was watching that part of the movie that just happened to be on the TV, and I was still half asleep, and that's the same feeling I got watching the quest part of Excalibur. Something I think is probably movie only, um, but is worth mentioning, is that I think Percival and Arthur have a fundamentally stronger bond than Arthur and Lancelot do. The bond between Arthur and Lancelot was primarily based on guilt, guilt that Arthur felt for killing Lancelot with Excalibur. And again, I think this is movie-only stuff that's happening here. Whereas Percival was the only person, he wasn't even a knight, who volunteered to champion Guinevere and defend her honor against Gawain's accusations of infidelity, yeah, I can talk, with Lancelot. I think that Arthur saw that. He recognized his integrity and courage, and that's why he knighted him on the spot to be Guinevere's champion. And I don't think he ever forgot that act of selflessness by Percival. So I think that it's particularly sad when Percival doesn't get to say goodbye to Arthur at the end of the movie. See, there's been a big battle against Mordred. Arthur's mortally wounded. He tells tells Percival to return Excalibur to the lady in the lake. So he sets out to do it. He can't quite bring himself to throw the sword back into the water. So he comes back to where Arthur's hanging out, mortally wounded. And so I couldn't do it. And Arthur's basically just obey me and throw the sword away. He goes off again, sees the lady in the lake, throws the sword to her. But by the time he comes back this time, Arthur's nowhere to be found. There's a scene that cuts kind of to where it shows Arthur on this boat with 3 nuns, it looks like. Maybe they're dressed similarly to how Guinevere was dressed, because she went to a nunnery after her infidelity with Lancelot. He's just being taken somewhere. The movie doesn't say, so that's. I'm not sure why they made that choice. Maybe they just figured, okay, not everything needs to be explained. It's not like there's going to be a sequel, but in a lot of the Arthurian tales, uh, he's being taken to a place called Avalon where he can be healed and then wait there until his country desperately needs him again and he'll return to them. Something I wouldn't have clocked when I was a kid, but I did this time around, is it feels like Avalon is the same thing as the Havens in the Lord of the Rings tales, or I guess vice versa, right? Because Arthurian legends definitely came before Lord of the Rings. But, the place where Gandalf and Frodo and Elrond sail off to at the end of the Return of the King. I don't know. I just think that's pretty cool. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I like it. But yeah, it's just sad to me that Percival, who obviously thought a lot about Arthur and greatly loved his king, didn't actually get to say a proper goodbye at the very end of the movie. So that's kind of sad. Another plot point and it's probably just because it's only a movie, there's not a lot of time for background, but I never understood what happened between Morgana and uh, and Merlin. Uh, I just never got why she ended up being Merlin's enemy in the movie. It feels uh, whatever happened between them happened off screen, right? And one of the problems with researching a 44-year-old movie is that it can be very hard to find information on it or theories or anything like that. And when I tried doing some research, the overwhelming amount of information that I was coming across was instead for the characters played by Helena Bonham Carter in the 1998 miniseries Merlin, which also starred Sam Neill as Merlin, Sam Neill from Jurassic Park. And I am now realizing that I've never seen that miniseries. It's only 2 episodes. I might need to watch that. If you have seen that, if you saw that Merlin miniseries on NBC so long ago, is it worth it? Should I bother? Let me know in the comments, and I'll think about it. And speaking of movie Morgana, the actress is Helen Mirren. Dame Helen Mirren was Morgana in this movie, and she was cast opposite Thomas Nicol Williamson, who played Merlin. The director did this on purpose because he knew they had a working relationship prior on a production of Macbeth, and it was not good. They did not like each other. And so he wanted them together on the film because he wanted that tension to come across on the screen between the 2 characters. Happily enough, Dame Helen said that it all worked out in the end, and by the end of the movie, they were fast friends, and she very much loved the man, and so that was nice. That it accomplished a couple of things. Them coming together ended a bit of a bad feud, bad blood between the 2 of them, and the tension I feel is very palpable on the screen between those 2 characters. So all's well that ends well, I guess. Another thing Boorman mentioned is that he said that while his movie is in part an adaptation of Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory, it's also an amalgamation of a few different Arthurian tales, as well as um, his own imaginings, right, for the movie. And but intentionally said went heavy on the Christian symbolism in the film. Quote, "That's what my story is about. The coming of Christian man and the disappearance of the old religions, which are represented by Merlin. The forces of superstition and magic are swallowed up into the unconsciousness."
Anal na trach, wrthas bethan, doch yel dienne.
So anyway, I would absolutely recommend getting this movie. Um, it's it's beautiful. The Blu-ray edition is gorgeous. Some of the acting now in my 50s versus when I was 11, I can see where it's a little hammy, right? Patrick Stewart is in here, looking as he has always looked. I think he said in an interview once that he went bald at 19, and so yeah, he looks exactly the same to me. It's a fun take on the legend. You won't wish for your time back, like if you were to say have watched First Night with Richard Gere and Sean Connery. Yeah, you could do a lot worse than watching Excalibur, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks for stopping by. I hope this was enjoyable for you. I love talking about movies and TV and things like that. So, yeah, I'll be doing another one of these pretty soon. All right, until next time, I'm Ken. You take care.